Wonderful. Well, welcome. I am Sarah Beth Kitch, and I am so delighted to welcome you to Truth Matters, a book talk with Robert George and Cornel West. It is a great honor to be here with them tonight, a great privilege for us to get to share in their conversation. I also want to thank the people who brought this event about: Ryan Streeter, Justin Dyer, Sydney Leary, Melissa Pardue, and Reed Comstock. So grateful for their work in bringing all of us here together tonight. By the time I was 17, my experiences had given me questions. What is justice? What's a good life? Amidst so much disagreement and conflict, how can we speak about truth and beauty, even what is holy or sacred? That year, as any well-adjusted teenager would do, and equipped with the latest in MP3 technology, I downloaded an MP3 of a talk on natural law by one Robert P. George. I increased my cool kid credentials the next year when I absorbed his book, Clash of Orthodoxies. Over time, I found that he gave me a language that orients me to this day, a language of truth and beauty, goodness, the rule of law. We are so grateful that he is with us tonight. He meant all of this to be accessible to readers of different persuasions. Dr. Robert P. George is the 6th McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University and director of Princeton's James Madison program in American Ideals and Institutions, which was founded under his leadership. His work on natural law has brought him to an eminent place in national conversations on bioethics, religious liberty, and the rights of conscience. I'm from South Louisiana. The stories and people of that place shape me. They taught me what there is to love about America. They also taught me what questions I wanted to ask about our best and worst moments. As I turned to study more carefully the work of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., I found in Professor Cornel West a worthy guide. I had long loved the healing fire of the prophetic tradition, and there are few exponents of that tradition who speak with more clarity or more love. Dr. Cornel West, affectionately known to many as Brother West, is the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Chair at Union Theological Seminary. Dr. West teaches on the works of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as courses in philosophy of religion, African American critical thought, and themes that span the classics, philosophy, politics, political theory, music, and more. His work hands on the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., a legacy of telling the truth and bearing witness to love and justice. We're grateful that he's here with us. In fall 26, I was a postdoctoral research fellow in the James Madison program, which Robbie founded. I had the opportunity to witness in person one of their public conversations on the meaning of education. That conversation has kept me occupied with questions since then. Their love of the questions, their care for one another, their love of music stands for me as a model of exemplary conversation. They also raised tensions through their disagreements that I continue to ponder to this day. So I'm especially looking forward to this experience for the School of Civic Leadership students who are here. I encourage you to notice, where do they agree? Where do they disagree? How do they speak about the pursuit of truth? To moderate our conversation tonight, I'd like to introduce Justin Dyer, Dean of the School of Civic Leadership. Dean Dyer holds the Rex Tillerson Endowed Chair, Dean's Chair, and the Jack G. Taylor Regents Professorship. He writes and teaches in the fields of American political thought, jurisprudence, and constitutionalism with an emphasis on natural law. Twice now I've seen Dean Dyer build places that invite people to reflect deeply on the principles of the natural law and of constitutionalism in America, principles that allow us to think differently and live together. All three of these men have given me a more human language for human affairs, and so it is a great privilege and a great honor to welcome them tonight.
I'm on the end. Robbie and Cornel, welcome.
Thank you, Justin. Great pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Blessing to be here, my brother.
Well, we've been thinking about truth, and you have all probably noticed as you walk on our campus and you look up at the main building, there's an inscription there, and it says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And that inscription was recommended to our Board of Regents 100 years ago, 1935. There was a professor named William Battle, had a big impact on this campus, was a president, classics professor, chaired a committee, and the committee decided that they would recommend that inscription for our main building. And when they did that, he wrote back to the committee and he said, "Truth and freedom are so essentially the foundation of education, character, and progress that the injunction to seek truth as a means to freedom is as splendid a call to youth as we can make." And the regents agreed, and that now is the inscription that students see. And the source of that quote, as most of you probably know, is from Jesus in the book of John. But there's another quote from the same book from a different character, Pontius Pilate. And he says, "What is truth?" So you've just written a book called Truth Matters. Let's start at the beginning. What is truth?
Easy query to say. I appreciate that, Brother Dean Justin. Did you want to start, though, Brother?
No, Cornel, you go right ahead. Yeah.
Well, first, I just wanted to say it's always a blessing to return to University of Texas, Austin. My mother grew up in Orange, Texas, so each time I come to Texas, I feel as if I'm coming home. I feel something very deep inside of me when I come to Texas. I want to salute the captain of the ship, Brother Jim. It was nice to meet him, and the same is true with Brother Will, who we had met earlier before, and you, Brother Justin, very much so, and Brother Ryan and Sister Sarah Beth. We blessed to talk with freshmen earlier. There's 104 magnificent, priceless, precious freshmen who are the inaugural class of this school. Maybe we should just give them a hand.
Amen.
Let's give them a hand. Absolutely. Absolutely. But what is truth, or how do you talk about truth? And I think in the biblical sense, of course, you can't talk about truth unless you talk about a way of truth. There's a scientific truth that has to do with how do you keep track of objects in space and time, be they visible or invisible, protons or objects like tables. But there's certain deep existential truths that have to do with what kinds of things we have to do in order to pursue the highest levels of arete, of excellence, of character, of soul craft. And I think within that biblical context, the backdrop is this Palestinian Jew named Jesus saying, "I am the truth, the fleshification of truth." This is not correspondence theories. This is not coherence theories. This is choosing ways of life in the midst of a world that seems to be so God-forsaken, shot through with so much organized greed and weaponized hatred and routinized indifference toward the vulnerable. But if, in fact, you choose a way of truth toward truth, and in this case, a choice for following Jesus, then, in fact, you are in that world but not of it. That you're opting for integrity, honesty, and decency. You're opting for love. You're opting for fidelity in a world that's trying to undercut those pillars every day of your life. So that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, and the response to that suffering has to do with courage, faith. It has to do with vision, hope. And most importantly, it has to do with love, which is cruciform, headed toward crucifixion, headed toward vilification. That's what it is to follow this particular Palestinian Jew named Jesus. You deny yourself and pick up your cross and follow. So you have to be equipped in that way. So I don't know whether they had all that in mind when they came up with that formulation. But that's how I would understand it, coming out of my own humble opinion and the great tradition that produced me, the Irving B. Wesses of Owen, Texas, and Clifton Wesses of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Shallow Baptist churches, and Willie P. Cooks, who shaped me in terms of how I choose what ways of truth to pursue truth, knowing that I never possess truth. I'm open to being shaped by it, but I will always fall short. I'll always be a cracked vessel just trying to love my crooked neighbor with my crooked heart.
W.H. Auden.
The great W.H.
Yeah.
himself.
Well, Justin, first let me add my words of gratitude to Cornel. It's wonderful to be back at the University of Texas at Austin. This thing right
Yeah,
here? Yeah. I was told to do that. I don't know why. Somebody told me to do that. And what a special treat to be able to contribute with my dear brother Cornel to the intellectual life of the School of Civic Leadership and the Civitas Institute. These institutions are among the most exciting things happening in contemporary higher education anywhere, not only in the United States, but in the world. Those 103 or 104 freshmen are the luckiest young people on the face of the earth to be part of this exciting new initiative. So Justin, thank you very much, and President Davis, and of course my dear old friend Will in Bowdoin. It's also such a treat to be with old friends I wasn't even expecting to see here. My friend Phil Munoz, the distinguished professor from Notre Dame, is here. My dear old friends Mariano Orlandi and Kevin Stewart are here. And I look out and I see my former students, Chrissy and Evan. They survived my instruction. That's amazing. And here they are to get more of it. Or maybe they're here for Brother Cornel. That's a better way to do it. And of course, it's always just such a joy to be with my dear brother, Professor Cornel West, America's premier public intellectual. Cornel and I now have been teaching together, arguing with each other, praying together, singing together. I've been learning from him for more than 20 years, and it's really been the most blessed part of my 40-plus years now in academia, in higher education. Just such a blessing. We began teaching together officially in 2005. We knew each other, but not terribly well before that. At the teaching together in our joint seminars, those who were, the youngsters who were at our meeting this afternoon from the Society of Cincinnati will recognize the name of Alfred North Whitehead, the great Harvard philosopher that came up in those discussions. We entitled our seminars Adventures of Ideas, and they really were. They were explorations of the great ideas that have been debated throughout history, going all the way back to antiquity, to Greece and to Rome, to Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, all the way then through the medieval period, figures like St. Augustine, Moses Maimonides, St. Thomas Aquinas, Anselm, and then on, of course, into the Reformation era, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the 19th century figures like John Stuart Mill and John Henry Newman, and then into the 20th century, kicking around ideas, debating ideas, working on the readings of John Dewey, C.S. Lewis, Leo Strauss, Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail. This is just an enormous blessing. So, to get to the question, what is truth? It's being in touch with reality. It's having an accurate understanding of the way things really are. Whether that is the way billiard balls move across the plane of the billiard table when struck by a cue or struck by another ball, or whether it means being in touch with reality, having an accurate understanding of whether it's right or wrong to tell a lie, or whether it's right or wrong to abuse or mistreat or enslave or dominate. It's being in touch with the reality of the matter. Now you might say, well, then that makes things easy, because don't we all want to be in touch with reality? Now, in a certain sense, I would argue, yeah, we all do, in this sense. We all can actually see the point of being in touch with reality. We can understand why someone would do that. But here's the complication. We frail, fallen, fallible human beings can have incentives, and we all do have incentives, to flee from reality, to favor unreality, to favor illusion, to not want to be too closely in touch with the truth when it impedes things that we really want, the products of our wayward desires. Cornel often comments on the wretchedness of human beings, looking at the whole history of the human race, a history of exploitation, domination, enslavement, abuse, cruelty. Well, those things don't just happen. Those are the products of misguided, wayward desires, where people don't want to have those desires subjected to the cutting edge, the sharp knife of truth, which relativizes and marginalizes them and identifies the reasons, our desires to the contrary notwithstanding. It's our obligation to do what's right, not what's wrong. So we're in a contest, each of us, in his or her own heart, about whether we really do want to live up to truth, or we'd rather live with our own comfortable illusions that always affirm us in what we want to do, whatever we want to do. Solzhenitsyn, the great Solzhenitsyn, who Cornel and I have also taught. We taught together in one of our seminars his magnificent 1978 Harvard commencement speech. Cornel was there. He was graduating. He was actually there when Solzhenitsyn delivered it within the walls. I was there, as it happens, as a graduate student, so I wasn't in the walls of Harvard Yard, but I heard it. I was outside and heard it over the loudspeaker system. What did Solzhenitsyn say? He said that the line between good and evil runs within every human heart. We like to think the line between good and evil is me and the other guy, or my team and the other team, or my tribe or my group and the other tribe or the other group. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Solzhenitsyn gives us an antidote to that in the name of truth. The truth is that the world is not as black and white as we would like it to be. That the line between good and evil runs right through every human heart. That's mine as well as yours. So what is truth? It is being in touch with reality and refusing to live by illusions, no matter how comfortable they are.
When you were talking about truth, you had one example was a pool ball going across the felt on the table, and then the other example is what's the right thing to do. And there's a common way, I think, of thinking about this that divides those two things as two separate questions, that there is a truth about physics that is going to tell us something about the pool ball. But in what sense does the category of truth make sense when we're talking about how we ought to behave or what we ought to do in this circumstance?
You want to go first, Cornel?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I mean, one is that truth is actually, I think, a species of the good. So our conception of the nature of reality is part of our moral life. And in the modern world, with the breakthroughs of science and technology, that has had tremendous success materially and technologically, not as much spiritually and morally. The claim was, if we can predict the future in light of the past, to be able to dominate and manipulate nature to generate new technological innovations, then that is going to provide us with resources to deal with what does it mean to be human? What is the good life? What ought we to hope for? That turns out not to be the case. That's why Einstein and the others who were on the cutting edge of the scientific revolution would say over and over again, we need something more when it comes to what it means to be human. What is a good life? How do we relate to each other? How do we hold on to integrity, honesty, and decency, and love and friendship? That the claims of the new physics and the physicists are not going to generate the resources to deal with those questions. So we're going to have to look to other traditions. Oh, lo and behold, here comes Socratic legacies of Athens, prophetic legacies of Jerusalem, Ciceronean legacies of Rome, and so forth and so on. And I'm just talking about the West. The non-West, the traditions outside of the West have their own great insights too, as well as their blindnesses. Just like we who've been shaped by Athens and Jerusalem have some deep insights, but we have our blindnesses too, because we're human beings. That fallenness that Robbie talks about is very deep. Now, he's Catholic, so he doesn't believe in the wretchedness in the way in which I do. Oh, I'm hanging loose Baptist on this.
Total depravity.
So when I say wretchedness, I mean wretchedness. When Here's the Catholic. We're wretched, but we've got reason and we got sacraments. We got all right, brother Robbie. We love you, brother. But the point is, once we really get in the argument, as we do in the book, you see that we overlap in very deep ways. But what I'm saying is that, most importantly, that we have to be able to understand that truth talk is never just abstract. It has to do with who we are, what kind of choices we make morally, ethically, existentially, and how it connects to our soul formation. Use Plato's language in the Republic. Soul, the turning of the soul. From what? In his case, it was from the world of appearance to the world of reality, what Robbie was talking about. But he understood truth as a species of the good, and the good was actually even the grander one, the idea of agathon. Good was even deeper than truth talk. But that's a particular view of that particular magnificent pagan that we love, called Plato, and all of his blindnesses and all of his profound insights as well. But we all had to make choices as to which traditions we're part of. And myself, as a particular kind of Christian, I put truth as a species of love, because I think that's what's at work in the Hebrew scriptures and biblical texts, you see. Because God is the fundamental reality. What is that God? A God of love. Well, what does it mean, a God of love? A God that makes each and every one of us in the image of that God self, that endows us with a dignity and a sanctity that the world could never take away, because the world didn't give it to them. And so you stay in contact with that humanity and sanctity and dignity, no matter who they are, no matter what color, gender, religious identity, sexual orientation. Why? Because they already got that special image print. And so you can see the ways in which truth talk goes hand in hand with talk about goodness, talk about God, and in the end even talk about holiness.
There's a disagreement that runs through the book a little bit as you talk about the ability of reason and the role of reason.
Right.
And that came out a little bit as you're talking about total depravity, the wretchedness of human beings. How confident are you in reason's ability to uncover truth?
Yeah, I want to know the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord. Kierkegaard says that the brokenness of human being cuts across heart, mind, soul, and body. So that the cruciform character of life includes reason and will and conduct and being. Now, that does not mean that one becomes anti-reason. It does not mean that you opt for irrationality, but it means you recognize the limits of rationality, given the kinds of human beings that we are, the kind of creatures that we are. So Robbie and I want to exhaust all possibilities of rational argument, rational persuasion, the centrality of what the Greeks would call pitho over against bia, persuasion over against force. That's how Plato begins the Timaeus. The world is created out of persuasion in the Greek context. That's a very rich legacy that Plato and Aristotle and others pick up on, and Whitehead too, actually. And I want to push that. I just don't want people to have excessive, extravagant expectations. So if I discern that, my dear brother, I just kind of pull him back.
Reel him in.
Reel him back in. I said, oh, no.
Robbie, how excessive and extravagant are your expectations of reason?
Well, they're extremely extravagant. It is interesting. So when Cornel and I begin debating this question of the relationship between faith and reason, I come across sounding to him, and probably to a lot of other people, like a hardcore rationalist. And he comes across sounding to me, and probably a certain amount of other people, as a hardcore fideist. Fideism being the view that there's no significant knowledge worth having, especially moral knowledge or spiritual knowledge. There's no knowledge worth having that is anything other than the fruit of revealed truth, as opposed to what we can uncover by rational inquiry, deliberation, and judgment. But it's interesting. So once we get into the back and forth of debate, you'll see it in the book, in Truth Matters, he forces me to start entering some qualifications, some caveats, add some nuances. And I force him to enter some caveats, qualifications, nuances. And pretty soon you can see that neither am I a strict rationalist, nor is he a strict fideist. We're not nearly as far apart as it looks in the beginning once we add all those qualifications, caveats, and nuances, which is as it should be, right? When you're refining each other's thinking, you know? When you have two people who are both actually after the truth of the thing. I'm not trying to persuade him, he's not trying to persuade me. We're not trying to win a victory in front of some audience or some debate judges or something like that. We're trying to get at the truth of things. And he'll say, well, don't you have to qualify that in this way? And I say, yeah, that's right. And I'll say, well, there's a clarification, there's a nuance you have to. And he say, yeah, that's right. And pretty soon, you know, you're not in perfect agreement by any means, but you know, you're really not so far apart. And even the broader traditions we represent, you know, the more Protestant impulse on Cornel's side, the more Catholic impulse on the other side, don't seem as radically distant, and we can conclude that the whole Reformation was a great big misunderstanding that we should probably get past. But I'll tell you where we are 100% united, and that is in rebellion against the notion that is increasingly common, yes, among young people, but not only among young people, that, well, you have your truth, and I have my truth, but there's no such thing as the truth. Now, why are we in rebellion against that? Number one, we think it's false. Number one, we think there is a truth, an objective truth, about very important things. And we think it's very important to know it. Truth matters. Number two, the belief that you have your truth and I have my truth, and there's no such thing as the truth, is an argument stopper. It's a conversation stopper. What's the point of my engaging with you, offering you my thoughts, offering my criticisms, my challenges, or you offering yours to me if I have my truth and you have your truth? What we should be doing is doing what I just described and Cornel described a moment ago, refining each other's thinking, challenging, being challenged, requiring those nuances to be entered, those clarifications, those qualifications, all with the goal of getting at the truth of the matter. And then third, perhaps the most dangerous of all, that idea that you have your truth and I have my truth, there's no such thing as the truth. It sounds, doesn't it, at first blush, like, oh, how nice, intellectual humility. Sounds that way, doesn't it? Or it sounds like a kind of soft relativism or soft subjectivism, one that would invite a kind of toleration. Well, since you have your truth and I have my truth, we should tolerate each other. But that is not how it works out in practice. In fact, it is an invitation to dogmatism, intolerance, and ultimately oppression. Cornel and I are united. We're among the founding members of the Academic Freedom Alliance. We are united 100% in the support and defense of free speech for everybody. People that agree with us, people who disagree with us, people who have views that we think are odious. We are absolute defenders of free speech and, more broadly, civil liberties, precisely because we need free speech. We need liberty for the pursuit of important human goods, important human values, such as truth. Both Cornel and I have been critics of the 19th century British philosopher and public intellectual John Stuart Mill for various aspects of his writing, his utilitarianism and so forth. But we are with him in his argument for the importance of free speech to the pursuit of truth. For those of you who are students, you probably have run into, if not, you will run into, certainly in this School of Civic Leadership, Mill's famous work on liberty, Chapter 2 of Freedom of Thought and Discussion. And the reality is that we have seen it now in practice. This soft relativism, or putatively soft relativism, turns out not to be so soft, becomes the predicate for dogmatism, becoming ideologues, not allowing my view to be challenged. After all, it's my truth. What gives you the right to challenge my truth? Shutting down conversations, putting us into silos. I only hear what confirms me in my opinions. He only hears what confirms him in his opinions. That's toxic to two things that we should really care about. One is intellectual life, preeminently in universities. Number two, Republican government. It can't survive dogmatism, ideology, conformism, the shutting down of conversations. Now, genuine intellectual humility is another story. That's a real virtue, and it's absolutely necessary. It goes to something Cornel said in his very first comment, and that is, while there is a truth, we can be in touch with reality, or more in touch with reality rather than less in touch with reality. None of us possesses the truth completely. None of us knows it fully. None of us can possess it completely or know it fully. It's going to be bigger than any of us. We will always know it admixed at least with some error and misunderstanding. But if we're ever going to reduce the number of errors, swap out as many false beliefs as we can for true beliefs, replace them with true beliefs, we need people who will criticize, who will challenge. And we need to learn from those experiences to be our own best critics, to be our own devil's advocates, to challenge ourselves, precisely because we know we are wrong about some things. We just don't know which ones they are. Or tell maybe you disagree. I mean, is there anybody in our audience tonight who only has true beliefs in his head and no false beliefs? Anybody out there with no false beliefs in your head? No. And not a soul on this planet has only true beliefs in his head. Now, we radicalize the question. Can we at least say, I have no false beliefs, I'm sure I have no false beliefs in my head about important things, things that really matter, things that I deeply care about. Any false beliefs I have are just about trivial, superficial matters. I suspect if I ask for a show of hands, I'd get a similar result. No hands go up, because we all know we're capable of being wrong, not only about the minor, trivial, superficial things that we don't care that much about. We can be wrong about the big, important, profound questions, the ones we really care about, the big questions of meaning and value, justice and injustice, human nature, the human good, human dignity, human rights, human destiny. Our only hope, and here's where the intellectual humility really plays its role, of making any progress toward truth, is allowing ourselves to be challenged even when it comes to our deepest, most cherished, identity-forming beliefs. And we all know that is hard, because it's just our nature, wretched creatures that we are, that we want to be affirmed, especially in the beliefs that on subjects that really matter to us, that we think are really important, our basic values. We don't want to be challenged. We experience the challenge as a kind of personal assault because we wrap our emotions so tightly around our conviction. But see, that's not the friend of truth. That's the enemy of truth, because it renders truth-seeking, in the end, impossible. If I'm not willing to be challenged, if I'm not willing to consider a counter to the point of view I hold, even if not especially on the most important matters, then I am just an ideologue, a dogmatist, not a truth seeker. The bond that brings Cornel and me together, despite our many differences that I'm sure you all know about in politics and other things, the bond that keeps us together is the bond of truth seeking. I know he fundamentally wants to get at the truth. He loves truth more than he loves his opinion. And I want to be that way too. I want him to be able to trust that I am after the truth. I'm not jiving him. I'm not playing him. I'm not trying to trick him into agreeing with me. We're both in a mutual project, dialectically, given arguments on one side, arguments on the other side, to deepen our understanding of the truth.
And the other dimension is that I love the brother even when he's wrong,
Yeah.
even when he's right. We wrestle with that because love is not reducible to either politics or civic friendships not reducible to agreement but put on public policy. There's a reveling in one's humanity that needs to be accented. One of the wonderful things that I picked up in the dialogue with the precious freshmen this afternoon is, in the center that you all have here, there is no capacity to pursue truth if you don't establish bonds of trust, if you don't know how to respect each other, whether they're right or wrong, and whether, most importantly, you cultivate the capacity to love. And by love, what I mean is accept a person's humanity, even given their faults and foibles. And I'm not just talking about romantic love. He's got a wonderful wife, I got a wonderful wife, but we got a deep love. And both wives understand that. But that's very important, because the sign of an empire or civilization in deep spiritual decay and moral decadence is when you can no longer pass on to the younger generation how they can cultivate the capacity to trust, respect, love, and think critically for themselves. And of course, I come from a black people whose anthem is lift every voice. It's not lift every echo. And if all we can do is be echoes in silos and act in conformist ways and never want to be critical of anyone who's in our community or on our team, that is the recipe for sliding down the slippery slope of more organized greed, of more weaponized hatred. And that's always there. The hatred and greed is always inside of us. We never eliminate it. And the question is, how do we create moments of sustained interruption? And we experienced community this afternoon with those students, didn't we?
Beautiful.
They only been here a few months. They all freshmen. It's unbelievable. They just got here in August. All this Texas
Asking
heat.
wonderful questions.
Still have.
Good God Almighty. And they already, you could see emerging these beautiful bonds of trust and respect of each other. This is very important.
To truth-seeking, very important to the truth-seeking enterprise.
Truth-seeking, knowing that you're never going to be full possessors of it. You're not going to have a monopoly of it, so you're going to learn how to learn and listen, just like a jazz musician, right? You find your voice by what? Being humble enough to listen to the voices. And most of the great voices are the voices of the dead, not the quick. Now, I say that in the spirit of forgiveness for all of you all are still alive and breathing. But most of the great voices are the voices of the dead, beginning with your parents and loved ones, and then on the way to Jesus and Socrates. And I know those are two difficult examples, because who wants to drink the hemlock or be on the cross?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of space for truth seekers in most societies. That's a fact. That's why courage is so important.
You know, Justin, can I add one thing here? Institutes like, or programs like the School of Civic Leadership, and then institutes like Civitas, and institutes like them all over the country, which are wonderful, beautiful things. So excited about not just this one, which is in the leadership position, but all the ones that we have all over the country. Among their missions is the promotion of civil discourse, right? You students hear all the time about civil discourse. I think we need to say a word, Cornel, about what that is, because I think it's widely misunderstood, or not adequately understood. Here's the inadequate understanding of it, that civil discourse boils down to politesse, to being polite. Let me show you what's not civil discourse. What's not civil discourse is just listening, hearing, just sitting politely, not interrupting, not calling your interlocutor a name, not being mean, not stomping away while he says his piece, and then he sits and he doesn't interrupt me and he doesn't call me names and he doesn't stomp off while I say my piece. We may be hearing each other. That's not civil discourse. It's civil discourse when you are listening to each other, not just politely not interrupting. Politely not interrupting. If that's all you can get, it's better than shouting and certainly better than shooting. But it's not civil discourse, and it shouldn't be mistaken for civil discourse. Civil discourse is when you genuinely listen to each other in a spirit of truth-seeking, assuming that you can learn, have something to learn from your interlocutor, even if he's wrong. That the dialogue, the discourse, will deepen our understanding, even if I don't end up changing my specific view on the specific question. That's civil discourse. In civil discourse, you are learning from each other. Whether or not anybody persuades anybody, you are learning from each other. You're not just sitting politely and letting the other guy talk. I'll give you an example from my own personal experience. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the famous philosopher Peter Singer. Until he retired this year, was my colleague at Princeton. He was Cornel's colleague for many years when Cornel blessed us by being at Princeton. Well, Professor Singer's views, especially in the area of bioethics, are as far from my own as they can possibly be. Professor Singer very publicly, without any ifs, ands, or buts, has advocated the moral permissibility of infanticide. Not just abortion now. We're talking about killing newborn babies. In a famous article in the Spectator magazine called "Killing Babies Isn't Always Wrong," Professor Singer argued that parents should have up to 28 days after birth to decide whether to keep or kill a newborn child, a perfectly healthy newborn child. Now, if you know anything about me, that's about as far from my views as you can possibly, conceivably, in a million years get. There couldn't be someone further from me on that. And yet, in my engagement over more than 2 decades as a colleague and in writing, and we've debated each other in writing, in my interactions, written and oral, with Professor Singer, I have learned an enormous amount. Haven't changed my view, and unfortunately from my point of view, I haven't changed his view, but I have deepened my understanding of the principle of the sanctity of human life because he has forced me to consider the perfectly intelligent, I think misguided, but intelligent arguments, the challenges, the intellectual challenges he presents to the sanctity of life view. He represents a view that says not all human beings are persons. There's a class of human beings that are persons because they have or have achieved a certain level of mental functioning and self-awareness, but then there are other human beings who, though they are human beings, are non-persons. Unborn children, newborn children, people in severely cognitively disabled conditions, people in what used to be called persistent vegetative states or minimally conscious states, people in long-term comas and so forth. I'm glad that I didn't, at the beginning of my relationship with Professor Singer, say, I'm not going to listen to you. And I'm glad precisely because I think I understand the truth of the matter better in virtue of having to actually come to terms intellectually with his challenges. That's what civil discourse is all about. Civil discourse serves the end of truth-seeking. It's not just, can't we all get along?
What are the things about which you together have the deepest disagreements?
Deepest disagreement.
The faith and reason thing is, but then the disagreements turn out to be small. I mean that's a deep philosophical / theological disagreement. But again, once we've actually argued the thing out, we're not nearly as distant as would first appear. I don't know. He's a socialist, and I believe in markets.
I figured that would be one.
No, I believe in markets. I just want to make sure that they're produced under conditions in which those characterized as the least of these, of poor people, of working people, of marginalized people, of widows and orphans and fatherless and motherless, that their humanity is affirmed. And of course, he believes that too.
Well, see, once we start entering the nuances, he's going to say, well, what about a social safety net? And I would say, absolutely, you need a social safety net.
And see, as followers of Jesus, you see, all of the isms tend to be too truncated in terms of their labels. You see, and all of the isms, it could be capitalism. Well, capitalism has made tremendous contributions in terms of technological innovation, unbelievable scientific breakthroughs,
Lifting people out of
levels of
poverty.
productivity that have, in fact, consequences of eliminating poverty in various ways and so on, you see. But at the same time, you know, it's crony capitalism, monopoly capitalism.
I agree with that.
There's certain forms of capitalism, they're not really free markets at all. They're dominated by huge corporations and so forth. And so, you know, Adam Smith turns over in his grave because they trot him out all the time to justify things that he himself would never, ever have affirmed. And the same would be true in terms of tradition of socialism, that Brother Robbie has a fundamental commitment to the plight and predicament of poor people, both as Christian, but also in policy. Now, that's not always the case among conservatives and Republicans, but there have always been traditions of conservatives and Republicans who are concerned about the least of these. There's no doubt about that. So once you get beneath the isms, you begin to say, oh, let's be very concrete and specific about how do we go about ensuring that we can generate policy strategies and tactics that are informed by conceptions of the good life. And of course, as Christians, true to our calling to make sure that those that we see in the 25th chapter of Matthew, what you do unto the least of the prisoners, where is the discourse on mass incarceration? The children, precious Palestinian children have the exact same value as precious Israeli children. If you take that seriously, what does that mean? That precious Mexican children, Irish children, black children have the same value in Austin and New York City. What does that mean? And Robbie and I wrestle with that, and we've, of course, gone to hundreds of different places, and people are surprised. Oh, I didn't know Brother Robbie was concerned about poverty. I thought he was right-wing. Well, you got to get beneath the category. I didn't know Brother West believed that Marcus had any virtues whatsoever because he's a socialist. Well, Jesus is much more complicated than some socialist X or Y. But it's also true that it's very difficult to be a follower of Jesus if you're on Pontius Pilate's payroll. Because it means then that your conceptions of the world might be shaped by your allegiance to something else, whatever it is. Money, tribe, whatever it is, clannish sensibility and what. No, this love that we're talking about that you all have the audacity to put on your buildings, you're talking about undercutting any narrow tribalism and clannishness and parochialism. We're all trying to get at this universal truth about humanity, about love, and about justice and so forth. And there will always be discussions and contestations about it. But I think, you know, in the end, all of us just bear witness. I mean, T.S. Eliot is right. Ours is in the trying, the rest is not our business. The world has always been a mess, and it's going to be a mess when we die. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a mess when these freshmen graduate in 2000 what? What is it now, 2020?
Yeah, I hate that.
Class of 29.
Class of 29?
Class of 29.
Yes, indeed. But in that mess, and I'm using the language of Samuel Beckett. Beckett said we're all in the mess. That's what it is to be human, in space and time, in the mess. How do you create these moments of interruption in that mess to find some love, friendship, justice, beauty, goodness? But it's pushing back. Pushing back. It's like Sister Erica the other day.
Erica Kirk.
Yeah, got the thing, you see? Yep. You got a moment of overwhelming hatred, greed, indifference, callousness, people having these various political expectations, and she steps up and talks about forgiveness. My God. Love is about giving, and forgiving is one of the highest expressions of love. And then she talks about forgiving the person who murdered her precious husband. But that's beyond politics. That's beyond politics. That's a moment of interruption. She's pushing back forces of hatred and greed and indifference and callousness, and everybody has to come to terms with that moment. Now, most people didn't linger too long. We won't go into the details on that. But she was bearing witness of something that was at the deepest level. It doesn't get any deeper when you, at that
Very
moment.
powerful.
You know what I mean? And we see the same thing in other contexts. And in the School for Civic Leadership is, how do you create those moments of trust and friendship and fidelity and civility and community and democracy and try to sustain it given the forces of hatred and greed and indifference that are always impinging inside of us, around us, and in our institutions?
I think it's really critical that we create those moments of interruption that Brother Cornel is talking about in the tribalism of our day. The reality is that we're in a very polarized situation, and we're seeing the consequences of it now in violence. Right? It's not the first time. Obviously, there's the American Civil War. We're not there yet. God, I hope we never end up back there. Was it, Cornel, 750,000 dead in a population of maybe 25 million? But we were there before in 1800. The election, the bitter election of 1800. I mean, it was unclear whether the American Republic would survive that election. It was unclear when the Jeffersonians, the Democratic Republicans, won the presidency, whether John Adams and the Federalists would turn over power. It was a critical moment in the life of what we today call democracy, what our founders preferred to call Republican government. The life of Republican government when the Federalists did in fact turn over power, because the divisions in the country were so bitter, the hatred was so dreadful and appalling, and there was violence even then. Now, how do we interrupt the tribalism? First of all, we're not going to eliminate tribalism. It's in our nature, in our human nature. And it's not just a bad thing. It's certainly a dangerous thing. But it's good that we human beings are social, that we belong to groups, that we find our fulfillment in part in our relationships with people, other people, beginning with families, religious communities, other forms of civic association. And it's also true and not bad that some of the communities we form are communities integrated around shared belief. Religion is one of those. Politics is another one. It's not bad to be a member of a religious tradition. That doesn't make you a tribalist in the bad sense. It's not bad to be a Democrat or a Republican or libertarian or Democrat socialist. That's just a political alliance. What gets bad is when those tribal allegiances are allowed to override things that are more important. Truth, decency, honesty, and integrity. Or when they turn us into people who see members of other tribes as enemies, because enemies are to be destroyed. Not argued with, not persuaded, destroyed. That's what happened to Charlie Kirk. I'll interrupt myself to say, Cornel and I were on Charlie Kirk's podcast just a few months before he was assassinated. And Charlie Kirk knew how to be a partisan firebrand, no question about that. But there was really a moment of interruption on that show when we talked about deep issues in a serious way. And as Brother Cornel pointed out when we were discussing the assassination on one of the news shows together the other day, like our friend Justin here, Charlie had read our book.
That's rare. In
Yeah, when most
Very
people
rare.
who interview you on your book haven't read the book.
Rare.
I'll let
They
you know a
got the
little
picture,
secret.
they read the back cover, and they're ready for dialogue. Okay, all right, thanks.
And we had a deep discussion of
Brother
deep
Justin
issues
on top of these texts.
where Charlie treated me and treated Brother Cornel with deep respect, dignity, grace. Similarly, when we appeared together on Tavish Smiley's podcast. Tavish knows how to be a partisan guy, but he treated not only Cornel, but me with deep respect. Again, having read the book and discussing in a serious way the deep issues. The tribalism was interrupted, and people who come from different perspectives, different backgrounds, belong to different groups, different parties, different faiths, had a serious discussion. We can achieve that in this country, but it takes work and it takes role models, it takes examples. And those role models can't be just public intellectuals or even celebrities. Those role models have to be mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and auntie and uncle and neighbor and coach and pastor and teacher. Those are the people who fundamentally shape the attitudes and understandings of people as we form them, of our children as we form them, as they become adults. They have to see this modeled for them so that they can genuinely engage in civil discourse and achieve civic friendship. Civic friendship means friendship with your fellow citizens, treating them as your fellow citizens, not as your enemies, even when you disagree with them, even when you disagree with them about profoundly important things. At least having at the base, whatever your disagreements are, a shared commitment to truth, a shared commitment to honesty, a shared commitment to integrity, a shared commitment to the basic principles, the constitutional principles of our Republican democracy. That's a thin level of agreement, but it's enough, and it can sustain us despite our disagreements if we only do the work of making it happen.
All right, we have 2 microphones, and I want to do audience questions. Before we get to that, I want to do a lightning round. You're going to have to be quick.
Ooh.
So it's not...
Oh, that's tough. That's tough.
There's no nuance allowed in your answers here. Public trust in higher education is low. Why?
Boom, through the floor.
For good reason.
We lost it.
For good reason, absolutely. Professional managerial class has had too much arrogance and haughtiness toward everyday people. And they've been the winners under globalization, upward social mobility, but what, 62% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck? I live in Manhattan. 25% of folk in Manhattan, I live in Harlem, but whole Manhattan, 25% of people in Manhattan, utter poverty. 1 out of 24, millionaires. How are you going to create a sense of citizenship and public life and common interests given that grotesque inequality, you see? So that's just the material side. But then the moral and the spiritual side is once you get educated, you think you're so sophisticated and subtle and cultivated. Then you look at the other folk who haven't been to college. Well, the vast majority of our fellow citizens don't set foot in college. 48% go to college. What happens to the 52%? They are just as precious as our precious freshmen. 104 of y'all now in this program, right? And all the freshmen in the whole university. But that's also true for all the 18-year-olds all across Austin, Houston, Dallas, on chocolate side, vanilla side, brown side, indigenous people sides, and so on. Right? So the question becomes, well, these professional managers, they need accountability. Now that's exactly what Trump was able to see.
Yeah.
He said, I don't like those people either. Because they don't like me. They don't think I'm sophisticated. I wonder why, Brother Don. They don't think I'm smart. I went to UPenn. I wonder why, Brother Don. But he's got a strong point in terms of that element in his movement. Now, there's a whole lot of elements that we call in the question and so forth. But we still have to understand the context, because he's not in any way the cause. He is a symptom and a sign and a response to a larger cultural, political, and economic situation. And it means then that the public trusts and the universities, universities have to take responsibility, but we can bounce back. That's the crucial thing. We can bounce back.
As a matter of fact, diagnosis, do you have a remedy?
As a matter of fact, oh, Cornel, you want to say a remedy?
No, he covered it.
Oh, okay, so well, Justin, actually, Cornel and I have here's the remedy. We have an op-ed piece on this very question, why did universities lose trust and what can be done about it? It was published a few weeks ago in the Washington Post, so you can go to Google and you can look it up. And you can imagine how popular that op-ed has made us in our academic community, especially Brother Cornel, because it says things like universities allowed themselves to descend into dogmatism, ideology, wokeness, groupthink, conformism, discriminating against dissenters, people who disagree. It's a crazy situation where, you know, Harvard, polling by the Harvard Crimson shows that only 3% of the Harvard faculty represent conservative views, when half the country represents conservative. Not that you need parity or equality of percentages between them, but there's got to be something wrong here, you know, reproducing the same viewpoints, not entertaining serious criticism. How do you lose trust? That's how you lose trust. You allow your whole programs in universities to basically become indoctrination programs. Guess what? Parents notice that. Parents notice the kid comes home, I don't recognize the kid. He's got his head pumped full of this dogma, full of this ideology. It's not like thoughtful stuff where he's heard arguments contrary to the parent's religion or contrary to the parent's values, and he's willing to actually share the arguments and listen to the counter arguments. It's all of a sudden he's coming home and he's preaching these dogmas to his parents, no openness to any sort of criticism. Guess what? Like, normal people don't like that. And they're going to wonder what's going on in Austin or in Princeton or in Cambridge, Massachusetts or Berkeley, California. So they earned the distrust. Now we've got to do our best to get it back. But it's programs like the School of Civic Leadership here, the Salmon P. Chase Center at Ohio State, I hope my Madison program at Princeton, the program in human flourishing at Harvard, the Hamilton School, formerly led by William Bowden, provost here at Texas, at University of Florida. I think those are the points of light, the interruptions of the bad stuff that's going on in universities. And I think once the public begins to see and appreciate what's going on in these programs, we'll rebuild the trust.
You used the term wokeness when you were talking. And there's been a rise in recent months of the phrase, the right woke, or the woke right. Cornel, what is that term? What does it mean? What does it point to? And is it a phenomenon that goes across the political spectrum?
Oh, absolutely. But I've never accepted any discourse of wokeness. Even when I go to jail, which is a regular habit, people say, oh, Brother West, you know, we stand woke. I said, no. You stay woke, you suffer from insomnia. At my age, you got to take a nap, you know what I mean? I got to get my sleep. You see, there's a wokeness of the disciples at Gethsemane. He asked them to stay awake. They went to sleep. They should have stayed woke. The beginning of Walden, of the great Henry David Thoreau. He says, my aim is to awaken my sleepwalkers. He was talking about the Mexican-American War. He went to jail for that. He was talking about enslavement of black people. He went to jail for that, you see. That is a maturity that has to do with a sensitivity to the suffering of others. Now, they can call that woke, whatever it is. That's a beautiful thing. But when wokeness becomes simply a weapon to tar and treasure, to tar others and accent one's own virtue, that's self-righteousness. That's a form of spiritual immaturity. And that becomes wokeness, and that takes a number of different forms. That particular wokeness is ideologically promiscuous. It will lie with any politics, any religion, any community, any way of life. But of course, the discourses get so narrow and impoverished in television and so forth that all wokeness has to do with race and gender and sexual orientation. No, wait a minute now. Thank God for Walt Whitman, and he's as gay as James Baldwin, right? Absolutely. We understand the depths that come out of a variety of different voices, but they're critical of the insensitivity and arrogance that we often associate with wokeness. I mean, one of the challenges of programs that Brother Robbie was talking about, because we want the unleashing of Socratic energy and prophetic witness across the board.
Absolutely.
And it's very important to say over and over again that the legacies from Plato and Aristotle and Descartes and Hegel and Nietzsche and so forth is not the property of political conservatives. I don't exist without Dante as a Christian. I don't exist without Cervantes, Christian. And we ain't even got to that Russian Christian named Dostoevsky, who's complicated and confused and profound all at the same time, because he's part of my tradition. And so if conservatives come to me and say, well, I see you're reading the great books and that's right wing. Says who? Says who? You see. On the other hand, because we are where we are, many conservatives are leading the charge to keep alive those great books. That's a positive thing in that particular sense of acknowledging how those texts can inform Socratic energy and prophetic witness across the board. And so what is happening now is, it's fascinating really, is that the challenge with a lot of the programs is, will they become as orthodox, as dogmatic, as the very folk they were against? Now that's the language I would rather use rather than woke. But you see what I'm trying to get at though? And that's a challenge. Because it's a human thing. I mean, anytime you give people power, Lord Acton, Catholic brother, ooh, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Robbie had mentioned already Charlie Kirk just briefly, and I had thought it'd be a missed opportunity if we didn't talk about him, and I didn't know even what to ask. And so instead of doing that, I'll just end with a quote from Charlie Kirk. He was on campus, and a woman asked him why he's there, why he's doing what he's doing, whether you agree with him or not about his politics and his positions. But he said this, and you can watch it online, and it has a somberness to it given the heaviness of the last 2 weeks. But he just said, when people stop talking, that's when you get violence. That's when civil war happens. Because you start to think the other side is so evil, and they lose their humanity. And so thank you both for being here with us tonight, for your commitment to human dignity, for your commitment to humanity, for fruitful disagreement in an age of division.
Thank you.
Now don't leave yet. We're going to take 15 minutes for audience questions. We have 2 mics. You are welcome to get up and come to the front, and we will alternate and try to get through as many as we can. Because it needs to be brief, we'll keep it brief on the answers.
Yeah, we'll try to be.
Brother Evan Baer, there he is.
Still asking questions. I do not understand why you disagree. You both have commanding intellects. You've read all of the philosophy, the theology, the social sciences of the world. You've pursued each other in deep friendship. You've talked for thousands of hours. What explains the root of things on which you still disagree?
Things are hard. Questions are difficult. The greatest minds of history have disagreed about very important things. Not that I'm claiming that we're great minds of history. He is, but I'm not. No. Plato and Aristotle. Hard to get better than that, right? Hard to get smarter than that. Aristotle was a student of Plato's. And yet they disagreed on some, they agreed on some things, they're like Cornel and me, but they disagreed on some very, very important things. You know, you've worked with me, you have some idea from our classes of what they disagreed on. And that's because things aren't simple. Things are difficult. It's easy to make mistakes. It's hard to get things right. Certainly hard to get things perfectly right. We never get things perfectly right. As I said before, in all of our heads, even to the extent that we've attained some truth, the truth we have is admixed with a certain amount of error. And then our task is to try to swap out as many of the false beliefs as we can for true beliefs. And that's why we need to engage. That's why if you don't have a friend who fundamentally disagrees with you about politics, please go and make one. You know, your intellectual health depends on someone having someone you trust who can challenge your most deeply held beliefs. But the basic answer to your question, at least the one I'd give, Cornel, you should speak, is that stuff's hard. Life's hard. Questions are hard. None of this is easy. If it was easy, we all would agree. It's just not. That's the way things are in this vale of tears. What do you think?
I just say ditto, brother.
Thanks.
All right, next question. Here.
Thank you so much for speaking. I had two questions. Really had a comment and a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In the Jewish tradition, there's an idea that everyone has a truth. That you have a truth, I have a truth, everyone in this room has a truth, and together, through my truth and your truth, together we can get to a part of the truth. So it's not that it's my truth, it's not that I have the truth and you have the truth. It's not a sort of solipsism. Instead, it's I have a truth and you have a truth, and together we can get to a part of the truth through deep, intellectual, honest discussion. So the question I have, I'm 16 and I'm applying to this school, applying to other schools. I do truly believe that the great books are where it's at, and these schools are the hope of our society. How do I know that how do I know that my truth is correct? How do I know that this is what will establish hope in society versus become an orthodox institution and fits to a very specific form of great books? How do I know that I'm making the right choice?
Boy, that's a profound question. You say you're 16 years old?
Wow.
Good God Almighty. You actually have a maturity and a wisdom that one doesn't ordinarily hear among 36-year-olds, let alone 16. Because there's a humility and authenticity in your genuine yearning and seeking that I discern, just spiritually speaking. When I think of the genius of Judaism, I think of the love thy neighbor as thyself and embrace the stranger. So there's a sense of hospitality to those who have been cast as other. And always remember when you were enslaved in Egypt, when you were the stranger, when you were the other. And I made a covenant with you to do justly, love mercy, and to love humbly, you see. And the same is true with Jesus, with the Samaritan and what have you. So that when you talked about this sense of openness, it's not just the kind of academic openness of an open mind. If your mind remains open, a whole lot of garbage goes through. You have to have a critical filter to know how to engage, separate the wheat from the shaft. But you need to be open in the sense that no one has the full truth. Each one has the capacity to bring with them insights of what you call the truth in the various sparks on the inside. That's probably more, though, the Jewish mystical tradition than it is, because there's a sense of sparks given the shattered vessels that you get in Kabbalah, as opposed to other very rich traditions. Because Judaism is not monolithic, as you know. It's not homogeneous. A lot of different streams and strands, just like Christianity, just like Islam, just like Buddhism and Hinduism. Now, which schools to choose, we just pray for you, brother. I mean, we pray for you. That's your choice. So you work it through. The beautiful thing is that you don't ever want to feel as if you have to ask anybody's permission as to who you love or how you pursue your sense of the good. You learn from others, there's consultation, but that's the choice you make. Just like when you get married, you got to make that choice, then you live with it, but you make that choice. That's you, that's all on you, my brother. And so I don't have any kind of advice in that. One last word is that even, let's say, if you were to go to a particular school that seems to be more orthodox in a religious sense. There's a great book by Chesterton called Orthodoxy. And his conception of orthodoxy is just as dynamic and Socratic and critical as many so-called secular institutions are. Because orthodoxy must never be associated solely with the narrow and the truncated. The only way orthodoxies are able to stay alive is to have landmark and question mark interplaying with each other, the great landmark moments and figures, and then the questions you bring to them. So I don't want to think that orthodoxy is always a negative thing. There's something rich in orthodoxies that are mature, just as there's something very, very dangerous in various secular orthodoxies that disguise themselves and act as if they're so open-minded.
Yeah, on your specific question of where you should go to college, it seems to me clear in your case you should come to Princeton.
I thought you were going to say University of Texas, Austin.
That's second choice.
That's second choice.
Second choice, yeah. I think to justify the decision I think you're heading in the direction of, the first thing you have to judge to be true is that knowledge of truth, virtue, wisdom did not begin today or yesterday. In other words, you have to reject the judgment that we now know much more than our benighted ancestors knew. And therefore, we can ignore what they had to say because they were corrupt and they were involved in all kinds of stuff that we judge to be morally bad, unjust, and so forth. So history started, real history, virtue started yesterday, and now we're just going to push ahead. Now, I think that's a really bad thing to believe. So I think you have very good reasons for judging that it didn't begin yesterday, and you do have something to learn from the kinds of figures that I mentioned when I was talking about the great books, sort of courses that Cornel and I have taught together, where you are reading Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and Maimonides and Aquinas and Luther and Calvin and Erasmus and More and Locke and Rousseau and all the way up to the present day. So you have to believe that there is wisdom there to be appropriated, but understanding it not as dead wisdom, as a fixed body of knowledge like information, but as, to use that term Cornel just used in describing Chesterton's great book Orthodoxy, dynamic. In other words, they don't give you the answers. What those great figures do is give you the foundation from which to pursue the answers. They give you important insights that will enable you then to move on from there in the project, the enterprise of truth-seeking. And a good university and a good program or major in a university will be empowering you to do just that. They will be exposing you to the best that has been thought and said by the quick, as Cornel says, the living, but also by the dead. And as Cornel said earlier, most of the wisdom is not among the living. Most of the wisdom is among the dead. Man, you're sounding like a conservative these days. I'm liking that.
Okay, let's take two more questions. Sorry for those in line, but for those in line, come back to the stage when we're done and we clear out, and we'll stay and hang out and talk with you.
Okay. So I think nowadays, like, the way young people view politics has been increasingly through, very, very public, often combative debate. And at the same time, we have this idea that there's a heightening of rhetoric on both sides, and an increase in violence, unfortunately. And I think, and I don't mean to be pointed here, but Dr. West, I saw you a week ago on Piers Morgan, and I know that you walked out on that debate. I think they were debating rhetoric. I guess my question is, what was going through your mind during that debate? And in that context, what kind of debate is productive towards truth-seeking? And how are truth and rhetoric, or how one expresses truth in language, how are they related?
Yes. Now, let's just say that Piers Morgan is not the ideal context for genuine Socratic dialogue. That was a little bit too Jerry Springer-like for me. But in going on the show, I know that. But when the brother who I never met before, when he said, I wanted him dead and his wife dead, you see, that's not just, to me, an assault on me. That's slapping my mama in the grave. I wasn't raised like that. So give me a chance to explain why you're wrong. And I tried to explain. He kept coming at me. And I said, Piers, could you interact so we can have some kind of space for dialogue here? And Piers just sitting there smiling. So I could tell. I said, okay, Piers, you're just making money. This is Jerry Springer-like. You just get more eyeballs. You're just concerned about the market. You want to see this vicious kind of thing. I said, can we have dialogue? This is getting ridiculous. Can we have dialogue? No. I said, no. Then I got to go. Life's too short. So there's a limit, given the fact that you have to have some kind of respect and trust in place for a disagreement to actually be genuine and to be pursued. And I should have known that because he specializes in that. But every 3 months he'll give me every 3 months he keeps calling. So I'll give him another chance. each time, colossal failure, colossal failure. What does one do? So there's always limits to everything, very, very much. So you'll notice even in love, my brother, there's going to be moments in which you might have to make your move. I'm not saying divorce is a positive thing, but I'm saying there's always limits to every attempt to enact certain kind of virtues, especially given human nature and who we are. And that's one of the instances of it. And that's not the only one, you can imagine. That's not the only one.
A question that I'm frequently asked, and I'm sure Cornel has asked it, especially by students, is how can I get through to somebody who just refuses to have a conversation with me? How do I get through to somebody who is so dogmatic, so dug into his particular ideology that he's unwilling even to listen to me? Well, I don't have a good answer to that because it takes two to tango. You can't have civil discourse unless you have a partner who's interested in having civil discourse. What are you going to do? You can't beat them up and force them to. You can't give them a civil discourse pill that will make them suddenly open to other ideas. If their heads are so stuffed filled of ideology, it could be the right or it could be the left. It's completely irrelevant. But if their head is so stuffed full of dogma and ideology that they're unwilling to listen, they consider anybody who's not already in agreement with them to be a bad person, a bigot, a hater, a fool, a fraud. You're just not able to have that conversation. I wish I could say, no, I got a technique. I have a way of opening them up. But it really does take two people who are open to actually engaging and listening to each other in a truth-seeking spirit. That is, with a willingness to learn and not just to teach, to be instructed as well as to preach. And here, the best thing we can do is model that for other people.
Last question, bring it home.
Hi. So we've discussed a lot here about civil discourse and conversations, but not all discourse goes on around coffee tables and classrooms, and a lot of stuff takes place in the street. And Professor George, I know that in your past that you've endorsed civil disobedience.
Closer
Have you
to
heard
the
what I
microphone.
said?
I'm having trouble hearing.
Is that better?
Ooh,
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to restart?
I think just start with the civil
Okay,
disobedience.
so
Civil disobedience.
Professor George, I know that you, in your past, have endorsed civil disobedience. And then at Princeton, that a couple years ago you had a lot of protests around the pro-Palestinian movement, and even abroad, like recently in Nepal and the Philippines,
Yeah.
you have democratic movements that are not necessarily discourse taking place in a classroom, in a controlled setting where you're listening to each other, but it's more impactful. It has lots of resonance throughout the society. What place do you think that civil disobedience and public demonstration has in discourse, and is there kind of room for that in society?
Very, very good question, important question. So I defend civil disobedience, and Brother Cornel practices it. I always offer to bail him out of jail.
He offers to bail me out every time.
Yeah.
First phone call, do you need money? I'm broke as a Ten Commandment financially, but I'm going to make it. But it's just, it's the love that he has for me, which is quite, I'm sorry to interrupt.
But what I know about civil disobedience, I basically learned from Martin Luther King, and especially from the document that we teach in our Adventures of Ideas seminars, the letter from the Birmingham jail. Now, what does Dr. King say there? It's very important to understand it as a whole, not just bits and pieces, not just to take a little here and this there, and ignore what he says over here. So what does he say? Okay, first of all, why is he writing the letter from the Birmingham jail? He's in Birmingham jail because he broke the law, right? He's in Birmingham jail, he broke the law. Now, he has critics. He's writing that letter to 8 clergymen. Now, a lot of people, our students come into class just assuming those 8 clergymen were racists. They were the bigots. No, they were not. If you read the darn thing, you'll see that he expressly compliments one of them for the courageous stand he took for racial equality in his own church and paid a price for it. Those clergymen were saying, Dr. King, don't come down here, don't bring your Southern Christian Leadership Conference down here. because if you do, there will be violence. You won't commit the violence. They knew King was committed to nonviolence, and his people would take terrible beatings rather than engage in violence themselves. But said, if you come down here, violence will be brought to our city of Birmingham. Now, let's be clear. King knew that, and that was not something separate from the general project, because King knew that the beatings of protesters, of nonviolent protesters on national TV would strike the conscience of Americans all over the country and move the Kennedy administration, which was looking forward to 1964, we're talking about 1963, and who knew it needed again, as in 60, to carry at least one, probably two southern states, carried Texas with Lyndon Baines Johnson, that's how he got Texas, in order to be reelected. So there was a conflict of visions here. And those clergymen said to Dr. King, how can you, Dr. King, embrace law breaking when you yourself urged the importance of fidelity to law in demanding that the southern states comply with the 1954 Brown against the Board of Education desegregation decision? Now, that was a serious intellectual challenge, as was that point about violence, bringing violence to our city. Not that you're committing it, not that your people are committing it, but it's going to happen here. Now, King responded by saying, first of all, the worst situation we could have is lawlessness. In anarchy, the strong prey on the weak. That's what happens with lawlessness. That's the worst. And that's why obedience to law generally is so important. And why he says, I'm the first to urge obedience to law. But there are exceptions. They're small, they're narrow, but they're important. And here's where King goes into his distinction between two types of law, just and unjust. What's the difference? He's very clear about this. A just law is a law that is in conformity with the natural law and the law of God. And here he invokes St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. What is a law that's in conformity with the natural law? That is the moral law as it's accessible to reason, and God's law, the biblical law. It's a law that is in line with, uplifts the human spirit. What he calls, in that letter, the human personality. In other places he calls the human spirit. It elevates us rather than degrades us. What's an unjust law? It's the opposite. It's a law that's out of line with the natural law and the law of God, one that degrades the human personality. It degrades not only the ostensible victim of injustice, let's say the person victimized by discrimination, it even degrades the person practicing discrimination. It lowers him to an animal type, brute animal type status as an oppressor, a persecutor. It's in the interest, the true interest of both, to avoid this evil of discrimination. So you can't just break laws to make a point. You're only justified in breaking laws if the law is unjust, and even then, you have to do it consistently with three principles. He articulates them expressly. One, it's got to be done lovingly, not in a spirit of hate. Number two, it has to be done openly, not secretly. Not allowed to secretly disobey the law, secretly break the law, lovingly and openly. And then third, Brother West is a good example here, with a willingness to accept the consequences, with a willingness to go to jail. So there will be rare occasions when it is justified, and maybe even some occasions in which it is required. But they are an exception, and it's got to be practiced in a certain way and in a context that does not undermine the rule of law itself. I'll conclude just with one little story because it was so lovely. Cornel and I were visiting the Supreme Court. I was there to be sworn in by Chief Justice Roberts as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, where I served for several years. And I asked Cornel to come along and hold the Bible for me in the swearing-in ceremony. So he kindly did that, and my mom and dad were there, and my wife and my kids. We had a wonderful, wonderful visit. But as I wanted to be sworn in on a historically important Bible. I wanted it to be a Bible that stood for the principle of human rights, because my job as chairman of the Commission on International Religious Freedom was to uphold fundamental human rights, that basic first freedom, the right to religious liberty. So I called up to, I thought, you know, I'm sure that, that I can find a historically important Bible. So I called up to the house in Auburn, New York,
Upstate New York,
for the great abolitionist
Sister
Harriet Tubman, because I saw online that there was a museum dedicated to her, and she was a person I'd always so greatly admired. So I asked them, did Miss Tubman have a Bible? And they said, oh, yes. I said, well, do you have it there? And they said, oh, yes. And I said, well, I'm going to be sworn in as chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. I'd love to be sworn in on that Bible and Ms. Tubman's Bible. Would it be possible for me to borrow it? And she said, well, you know, it's kind of a difficult situation, you know, it's a trend and so forth. And I just interrupted, and I said, well, I've asked my dear friend, Professor Cornel West, if he would hold the Bible on which I'd be sworn in. And she said, oh, we'll be happy to send it down to you. So they FedExed it down. $1 million of insurance. Great big Bible. It was a huge Bible.
Unbelievable.
So we're walking up, Cornel and I are walking up the steps. My mom and dad are behind me, and my kids, and I'm like, and I got that big Bible under my arm. We're walking up the steps. And we walk past these two police officers. They're just there, you know, regular police officers there in front of the Supreme Court. They're there every day. And as we're walking past, we're chatting, and I see Cornel shoot a kind of glance over, kind of frown on his face at a policeman. That policeman, he frowns back. I didn't say anything. We just walk on, and then when we're out of earshot, I said, hey, Cornel, what was that going on between you and the policeman? And he said, well, couple weeks I was down here for a protest to get arrested, and he's the guy who arrested me. And he said, you know, come to think of it, Brother Robbie, I've never been to the Supreme Court before today not to be arrested.
That's true.
You remember that?
Now I do, absolutely. Especially your precious parents, and, you know, being in the court. Oh, that was something else.
He was coming in as the guest. The guy that arrested him 2 weeks ago. Now he's coming in as the guest of the Chief Justice for the change.
No, it's true.
Is this a great country or what? I mean,
That's right. All right, that's a great one to end on. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, my dear brother.
Good to have you, man. It's great to have you. Great to have you. There might be some people who want to come up and talk with us if you don't mind doing it.
Oh, sure. Oh,
Nope. Speaking out.
oh, that was wonderful, brother.